try and let everyone else be muted. And if you have a question, raise your hand, and certainly we'll call on people as we have questions. I think as you know, we did a similar presentation for the Police Accountability Board earlier this week. I'm sure Dr. Burns will be happy to have you all ask questions as they arise, and ask them to go further into different topical areas that you're interested in hearing about. And so, but obviously there are now about 25, 30 people on the call at this point, 30 people on the call right now. So let's try and keep it orderly throughout the evening, and then we'll proceed quickly. So with no further ado, I think I'll turn it over to you, Ashley.
Sure. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And I'm going to try to help us frame our time as well, because I know we don't have a whole lot of time. So I'd like to start by just introducing myself if there's anyone on that I haven't met before, and then to do exactly with Mark and Bernice began with, is to start with just an overview of what's taken place since the Reimaging Public Safety Task Force report, because sometimes we all have different information. So I want to start us out on kind of even ground of understanding where things stand. And then from there, it would be helpful to get a sense of themes to cover, just so that we're not all over the place. I can make sure I summarize some of the high-level topical areas, but it's been helpful to kind of keep our questions in themes so that we're not going like from mental health to use of force to training, you know. So if people want to put things in the chat to Mark and Bernice, or if we want to try to moderate this conversation a little bit, I think it would be great just in the limited time that we have. And it's been so long since we've been on together. My name is Ashley Burns. I am with Effective Law Enforcement for All. We have now been working with Montgomery County for, I believe, over 2 years. So we came on prior to the task force, kind of getting all the way organized. And so we had an opportunity to kind of be integrated into the task force process. We got to work really closely with Mark and Bernice, and then Carolyn Sturgis and others on all the different groups who met really almost on a weekly basis. I think there were over 30 meetings plus putting together the task force report. And then from there, the task force report went public. And then we moved on to reviewing the MCPD independently. And so we try to explain that those projects are very separate, even though it was intended for the task force work to inform the audit and how, you know, our understanding of what's going on in the community from that perspective before going in to look at things from the standpoint of the MCPD data and their personnel and et cetera. And so then we put out a preliminary report last June. And that was expedited mostly because there was a deep concern to kind of urgently get some things out and transparent and publicly. But since that June report, we continue to review MCPD and look at body-worn camera footage and interview officers and to continue the comprehensive project. And so that report came out in the fall. And so this has been kind of a very lengthy process of having the task force report, then the preliminary report, and now a final report in conjunction with a bunch of changes in state law, and in conjunction with a bunch of changes at the county level and municipal level, et cetera. So there's been a lot of moving parts in this project since day one. But what we can say is there's been great interest from the county, from the police department, from the community organizers and stakeholders, council members, the union, the civilian union. So many folks have participated and given their input into this process. And so there's been a lot of traction, not only on the task force recommendations, but also our preliminary recommendations, and now the final recommendations. And kind of where we are today is we have over 200 recommendations that the county and the department are actively working to implement, coordinate, track, but also importantly, keep transparently that information available to the public. And so those things touch on training, changes in use of force, changes on how the department handles mental health, behavioral health, and crisis-related calls for service, data collection, how the administration and management inside the department functions, such as internal affairs, and accountability, as well as early warning and early intervention systems for personnel of the MCPD, and so on and so forth. And so for this meeting, I didn't think it was appropriate to kind of spend your time on the slides because the report's been out now since November, and so is that slide deck. And Mark and Bernice and a bunch of you on this call are, available to the public at the report. So I really saw this as an important time to just dialogue together, have conversations, provide any updates that folks are looking for, and to have a conversation as you all see fit. I thought that that was the best use of time, if you all agree. So that was kind of my opening. The one thing I will say is I think that when this project started, this is just a very involved community that is like, I'm going to make sure that I have the community that I want to live in. And we've been now going around the country telling everybody about what's been accomplished in Montgomery County, Maryland. We think that the work that you all have done is really a national model for having, transformation and change within law enforcement and public safety. I think some of you know that a lot of the folks on our team come from the background of DOJ and state settlement consent decrees, which are lengthy, 10 years, 12 years, 16 years, et cetera. And so the progress and traction that has occurred in Montgomery County in 2 years, to me, is unprecedented as far as the scope and the breadth of change that is now underway that you all are going to now hold the public officials and the department accountable for. You've basically accomplished in a consent decree in like a year as far as getting a framework in place. And we do feel confident that over the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, kind of 3-year window, that you're going to be able to look back and see real change where you can say, we said we wanted this, and this is what it looks like now because of us. So I just want to commend everyone on the task force for being committed and making the dedicated effort and giving your voice and your resources and your ideas, because I think that other communities all over our country can look at the work that you've done and hopefully proactively, incite community-based and community-guided transformation and not necessarily have to wait for DOJ to come in or some egregious offense to happen again and again and again before there's some voice. So I'm going to stop for a minute and hand it back over to Mark and Bernice, so that you can give me your insight about how you'd like to proceed with the time that we have left.
I think we can just, take questions from our group and just see where we go from there. I wouldn't mind asking the first question if that's okay. Then people can jump in. Sorry about the phone. Your report, data is clearly a very critical issue in all of this, and our task force, there was some data that was very helpful, and there are a lot of gaps in data. And I think your report said data collection was woefully inadequate, I think was the phrase that was used, including, if I'm reading it correctly, data on arrests that was not including race, ethnicity, and gender, or not being posted that way or so. So could you sort of describe what you found at the time and, what's transpired since then, and, where do we stand now in terms of assessing, what those factors look like?
Sure. So I will address the question, and then I think I may turn it over to Chief Frank or Chief Jones to kind of give a more detailed insight about where the department stands on the data collection. So one, I want to say that across the country, there is a lack of adequate data collection. So I want to make sure that I express in all respect that this is not something unique to Montgomery County, Maryland. This is something that has really been a lapse nationally in collecting information about the subjects engaged in interactions with the police, bystanders, officers, outcomes, as well as the reason, and also having adequate record storage and, like you mentioned, Mark, transparency of that information back to the public and also the folks engaged with officers. And so some of this has to do with having the correct forms and the correct policies about what to document and when and why. And then another part of this is really about having the right technology on officers and in police cars and at the station and in the data systems to actually collect that information and to keep it and then make it available in a useful way so that the department's actually using that information to inform its practices and programs and activities, kind of in a systematic way. And so many agencies are moving toward, being able to know the race of the subject, possibly ethnicity, the race of the officer, the outcome of the stop, the reason for the stop, in a way where you could almost run a regression to have an understanding of if there is bias, for example, or if there's disproportionality in the time of day or region or location. And so we just think that because of the diversity of the county and the amount of interactions with the public, that this is going to be really important because this is something that's being demanded. It's a best practice nationally, but it goes in place when communities say, look, this is kind of how we want it to be. So I hope it answers the question to start the conversation, but I also wanted to make sure I give MCPD a chance to kind of opine on what you think about data collection, because I know Chief Jones, before we even started the audit, that was one of the first things the chief told us, is that he wanted to be able to have more information to inform the activities going on within the department. And so this was one where we heard on both sides that we needed improvement. And so that kind of led us in that direction. And so we had Datalytics on our team. They're an independent firm. And so they did a whole data assessment of MCPD, from everything from personnel systems all the way down to how they are tracking things like use of force and arrest. And so we have a full report that the department received that specifically on data and data systems as well. That's almost a standalone document from the audit.
So, good evening. I just wanted to note in answer to your question, Mark, and as Dr. Burns has so eloquently put, yes, when I first took over, one of the things we recognized as an agency, that our records management system was really extinct, and we needed to upgrade that records management system. That was a high need that we had, that was identified prior to the audit, and this only supported what we have been pushing for. So we were in a very lengthy procurement process, which we have just completed here in 2020, well, last year, the late 2022, and we have a vendor, and we are now in the midst of actually creating systems that are going to be able to provide much of the data that is being requested, as noted in the report and beyond. And so this system will go into effect. Our target date is January of 2024. It takes a while to build out this system with the vendor. Chief Frank is leading that charge. We are working feverishly to get this moving, because we know this is a very important functionality to assist with many different functions of our department. And we need to be able to have the data to help support and to be more functional. Chief Frank, I don't know if you have anything additional that you might want to add in that regard.
No, Chief, I think you hit the majority of it. The new RMS system we're designing, again, we've got a very aggressive goal. It's going to be difficult. We're trying to get it so that our RMS system becomes one of our main data collection sites, and that we make a tool that's efficient for officers, that when they're engaging in their different jobs, they can enter the data that's now been requested. I appreciate Dr. Burns mentioning that this is the state of our data is similar across the country, and a lot of the data we're being asked for now has never been asked for before. That's why it's never been programmed. It's never been created. So we are, my implementation group is well aware of both the Police Accountability Act, the ELE4A report, the Reimaging Public Safety recommendations, as well as a number of county council laws on information. I will say we still have a couple other challenges. You know, I think we've expressed before that our traffic stop data, getting into the granularity that people want has been and will continue to be a challenge because the state owns the ETIC system. I mean, I'm looking at Data Montgomery right now, and they have the very basic race block that is captured, and we have that information, but not down to the granularity and detail that some people want. So we're continue to working with our outside partners on seeing if we can refine that. And quite honestly, in a state of Maryland, with as progressive they are, I think we'll continue to see incremental changes getting us the right information.
Thank you. And I think that this is also a good time to explain the implementation committee. Again, making sure that we're all on the same understanding. So another thing that started is there is now an implementation committee in place, and I'm going to turn it to Dr. Stoddard to say a little bit more about that. But the idea there is to take the 200 recommendations and to have various stakeholders, for example, from Health and Human Services, Chief Frank, Dr. Stoddard, all these different folks meet regularly. The meeting now is occurring almost from a weekly to bi-weekly basis. And the point of that meeting is to coordinate progress on all of the recommendations. And so soon you're going to be able to go online and see every single recommendation, and it's going to be updated on a regular basis where you can see who's owning the work, what's going on in the work, and if there's any kind of essential next actions. And so they've been working really hard to figure out the best way to disseminate the information to the public. It's a fine line between wanting to just put it all out there, which is, I think, you know, the department's like, let's just put it all out there. We have nothing to hide, but it's also a lot of information. And so, you know, we don't want people to get lost in trying to track all of the details, but that information is going to be totally available to the public where you can see what's going on with everything from the task force report, our preliminary report, and the final report. But I'm going to let Dr. Stoddard say a little bit more for that.
Yeah, I think Dr. Burns did a really good job of talking a bit about the implementation group. We've actually been meeting, the group was formed prior to my joining in this role, so it's been meeting since Ms. Sturgis was in my position, and myself and Assistant Chief Frank co-chair the group. And as Dr. Burns alluded to, it's a multi-agency partnership within county government, because obviously different people own different parts of the implementation of this work. It's not just left on the police department to figure out. And the nice thing is that it gives additional eyes on the implementation steps that the police department is taking, so that there can be feedback provided to them. Obviously, that, you know, they're trying to work through the best implementation possible, but it gives them extra set of eyes on some of the work, provides feedback on some of the implementation steps, and so on. The nice thing also is that we've been able to, because, you know, obviously we alluded to the fact that there are county laws involved here, we've actually been able to incorporate council central staff on this effort, including Miss Wellens, the attorney for the council, as well as Miss Bragg, who staffs the Public Safety Committee, knowing that there are expectations around county laws and how we integrate. That actually work group is actually where we made the original genesis of some of our Police Accountability Board local legislation, and it came a springboard to some of those efforts. So I think it obviously works very well in terms of giving us focus within county government to ensure that we're operating to hold ourselves accountable to keeping the train moving forward with regard to implementation of the recommendations from all of the places that we have them. So we've integrated effective law enforcement for all into those implementation meetings, because obviously they're going to stay with us to help us begin to roll out. Right now we have 3 particular subgroups that are meeting actively around mental health training and use of force. And so we know that there's going to be modifications in those areas in the most immediate future. Obviously, as Chief Jones and Assistant Chief Frank alluded to, some of these measures are going to take longer to implement than others. And obviously, it's important to understand that when you're building infrastructure and systems, when there's budgets involved, when there's capital improvements that have to be made, they take a little bit longer than some of the procedural, policy, and other training related changes. I think also, I think I'll stop there, but I think there's, as we talk more about it, you'll see some of the work that the task force has done as well.
I think you're on mute, Mark.
Mark, you're
Still
still
muted,
on
Mark.
mute. Mark, you're still on mute.
I'm very good at Zoom. I'm less skilled at the team stuff. Okay, anyway, thank you very much. It's been very helpful, I think, and we look forward to hearing more about that. I think I'm not very adept at Teams technology, so Ashley or Bernice, you may want to do something, but I saw Joanna Silver had her hand raised, so she may want to go next.
I didn't see that. Oh, but okay, I do see it now.
Oh,
I guess I'm not as good on Teams myself. Okay, yeah, go ahead, Joanna.
Thank you. I know it's a little hard, these different platforms.
Right.
So a couple of things. One, I am really interested, Ashley, for you to be able to give us a little more detail about what you think is so revolutionary and breathtaking and what we should be so proud of in terms of the progress that's been made here, and to make sure that you hear that from the community's standpoint, that's not really what we've seen. And, and a couple of things. So first of all, we have no idea what's been implemented in terms of our task force's recommendations because the county has not updated the dashboard. It's not been updated in well over a year. It's a completely useless tool. So we can't follow any of those. We obviously know just from following the news and paying attention that there are many, many things we recommended that have not been implemented, some that were implemented and then unimplemented. So it's very hard for us to, to have any sense that there's been some sort of amazing revolutionary change. And we certainly don't at all have any reason to believe that because you made 200 recommendations that the county is going to be implementing those recommendations and is going to implement them like with fidelity and in a transparent way that we'll all be able to see. So I wanted to say that one thing. And then the other thing that's really hard for the community to embrace.
One moment
Sure.
though, do you want me to answer the questions or because that was already a lot? So just let me know how you want me to.
Yes, yeah, I do want to just make sure that I get to respond to this issue of data though. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think on the first one, we haven't caught sentiments that folks are not proud of this work. So I guess saying community is a broad term for such a diverse place. But I know that there are a lot of people, including you, who put a lot of effort into the task force work in itself. So I guess what I mean is there's some communities who are still just desperately even trying to get organized. And so to have a mission, to come together, to get organized, to meet every single week, to do the work, to get the report out in a way where when it first came out, not only is everyone saying that they agree with it and they're open to it, but then by the time we get to the preliminary report, you have your chief, you have your county executive, you have your task force co-chairs, you have your police union, your civilian union, and all those people coming together saying that, hey, we all believe that this is important and this is a priority. So, I think that the effort as far as the logistics of how to implement and what to prioritize and what the timelines are, that's one thing. But the amount of time spent and the amount of effort and the amount of people involved, there is no other place you can point to and say, oh, they did a better job than we did. So, this work is still evolving. So that's what I mean when I say transformative. We still have communities that are begging and writing letters to DOJ to please come here. And years are going by and they're still not getting anything. And years are going by. So even in our final report, we start to track some of the things that there's already been progress on since the preliminary report. And so I think that is still evolving, but I would not want to ever discredit all of the folks who have put in a lot of effort from all parts of the community on the project. For the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force IT, Dr. Stoddard, would you want to speak to the updates available online? I believe if you want a copy today, the February update is available. It could probably be emailed out. I don't know if you've requested.
No, we've been on it. I mean, you go on it, and the last time we were on it was like 2 weeks ago. I mean, we actually had an entire group of students at the University of Maryland try to like analyze it and find a way to make it a more functional tool for us, and they weren't able to. But like nothing is updated. There's nothing that like shows us what progress has been made.
So I think that it's transitioned to a dashboard of all the recs. So when at first it was only the task force report out. And so then when the preliminary report came out, now it's a spreadsheet of all of those. And now it's a spreadsheet of all three. So it's not three different dashboards.
I mean, I know what it is. I know what it is. And it hasn't been updated. So like we can't see what's happening. But I just want to clarify. So what you're saying is breathtaking and remarkable is the work that we all put into making the recommendations.
I didn't say breathtaking. I said
or whatever that we made these recommendations, that's what we should all be proud of.
It's not a whatever, because you're questioning what I said. I'm saying that, yes, I think that the work is remarkable, all aspects of it, like from beginning, like what it took to get the task force organized, the effort to complete the task force efforts, getting the report out, transitioning to the audit, and the effort that's now underway to promote and get the audit stuff done, and the level of accountability that I don't think is going to go away. So I think that if things don't keep continuing to move, I think the accountability is still right up front, and it doesn't seem to fade because folks are continuing to ask about this, like the PAB, the PAC, Mark and Bernie. I mean, we've had lots of people constantly asking about this project and involved in many, many different layers. But I don't know if this is one of those things where there's just like a lack of clarity about where things are, which is why I think Earl is trying to get the website in a way that's going to be digestible to the public. But also I think it might be helpful to Joanna, that like if you have thoughts about that synergy between putting everything out there or trying to make it where it's easy to read or easy to follow, or if it should be kind of like different versions of how that information is put out to the public on a regular basis.
Yeah, I mean, we have, I think, a variety of people who would be happy to chime in terms of how we could better access the information.
Yeah.
And we'd be happy to. And yeah, my understanding is that there's nobody in the community on this implementation task force either. So that makes it difficult for the community to be part of the implementation and to have any of the confidence that you seem to have in the accountability piece, which is really, that's what the community cares about. So the community doesn't really care that all of us here spend a lot of hours doing this work. I mean, it's great. Like we're all competent people and we can pat ourselves on the back for doing the work, but it's the implementation and the accountability around the implementation that the community cares about. And then I just want to say one last thing on the data, and then I'll stop talking. That raises real questions. So on traffic, which Assistant Chief Frank mentioned, we have tons of data. We have really, really good data. And there was just a briefing on the most recent data we have on race-based disparities in traffic. And the police department's response to that was to basically deny that there are race-based disparities, to deny that there's bias in traffic enforcement, to blame it on the fact that Black people from Prince George's County and DC come into Montgomery County, and that's why it drives up our enforcement, our disparities, and to basically say that there was nothing wrong with how they were enforcing traffic laws in Montgomery County, despite the fact that we had tremendous data showing otherwise. So it's like a little, again, and we all support gathering data. The community supports bills asking for more data, but you have to understand that if the response to data being shared is going to be a response similar to what we just saw in front of the county council this week, then people are not going to have confidence in that data. And there's not a whole lot of point in collecting it then.
Well, I'll just say thank you for the feedback. I mean, I don't think we're going to find agreement on whether, you know, the people who are implementing the work are committed to it or not. I think we're just going to disagree with, I mean, that's a argument over whether you have confidence in people working in government, essentially.
Sounds good. Thank you. Good night. Appreciate you.
Thank you. And for me, I'm speaking from the perspective of the meetings that I have joined. So I know that part of this was making sure that the efforts were coordinated, right? So there's overlap in a lot of the recommendations across the 3 reports. And so for this to be done effectively, someone has to step back and think of it from a strategy standpoint. For example, policies have to get rewritten, and they have to get rewritten well. And then you have to have the policies to then train on the policies. And then we also have feedback for how we believe training could be improved, right? The delivery of training and the pedagogy of training and even the management of training academy, which also has to happen. And then you have to get the boots on the ground of the practices and have the accountability and the close and effective supervision of those things. And so you can't really start fixing one thing without fixing the other. So for example, the use of force policy has now been revised, I believe, 3 times since the task force started, right? But we can't keep revising the policy over and over and then retraining officers over and over. At some point, we have to step back and slow down. What is the policy going to be? How do we meet the state, the municipal, all of the different things that people are saying needs to be done, and then get that policy into effect, so that people start to understand what to do on the street. So I also want to reiterate that, like, moving fast doesn't mean you're moving in the best direction on some of this stuff if there's sequencing that needs to be done in order for it to be done effectively. Even in the mental health aspect and the behavioral health and crisis response, right? There's so many recommendations related down to getting the call for service, how dispatch takes place, the training of those at dispatch, the coding of the calls, what things look like when people are responding to the scene, and then even how those scenes are handled down to how they're documented, and then how that information is collected and looked at systematically, right? That's a lot of different elements to change a system. But ultimately, we also think that there could be a more robust crisis response system and training for officers on top of all of the other things like the co-responder, et cetera, et cetera. So I also want to reiterate that, like, even though there's 200 recommendations, you have to make sure that they don't contradict each other and figure out how to group them. And so I think that's why Dr. Stoddard mentioned having these working groups, like, okay, what's everything related to training? Are we going to get a curriculum director in place? Are we going to get curriculum writers in place, right? Are we going to do the adult-based learning? And how are we going to sequence in all of these changes into academy, especially when, for example, one of our recommendations is that there be a master training plan where academy actually steps back and says, what are our philosophical goals? You know, what do we want a good officer to look like? Which again, that's informed by the task force report. So I think that there's just a lot of work to be done, but I don't think that anyone's shying away from the work or the conversations needed to continue the work. And so I've only been in 2 or 3 of the implementation meetings. The report only came out in November, and then we had the holiday season, and here we are sitting in February, and this meeting was originally going to take place a few weeks ago. So I don't know if you've missed as much on that front, but we are integrated into the meeting now. And the folks at ELE4A, we're happy to continue to meet with the task force. This doesn't have to be a one and done thing. You know, now that we're there, we're happy to report back to you and to bring you along in this process as we, you know, have a chance to have an inside look as well. So I'm going to hand it back to you again, Mark and Bernice.
Bernice, you're muted.
I do. Okay. I do see some questions in chat, and my apologies, folks. It looks like the questions were on another screen for me, so I just popped over and saw all the activity. So my apologies for missing the earlier questions. Let's see here. All right, so I'm looking at the first question that has not been responded to directly. Are there any minutes or notes available from the 3 implementation work? Okay, I'm sorry, before that, has there been a response to the OLO report on traffic enforcement? And are there minutes or notes available from the 3 implementation work groups? And that's from Scott Schneider. And I'll leave it there because I want to go in order of the receipt of the questions. So if anyone can answer those questions.
Well, I think we've with regard to the OLO report, there was obviously a council session that I think a lot of conversation happened, and I would certainly encourage. I certainly think there's a strong dialogue back and forth between the council members and the police department on the report, questions that they have, additional follow-ups for additional data that they had for OLO to conduct, and so I think that was a very fulsome discussion that I think would be difficult to answer in just a quick answer on the OLO report. So, I encourage you to, yeah.
So there's a link to it, I presume.
I can actually find the link while we're continuing to answer questions, and I will put it in the chat.
That'd be great. Great. The next question regarding mental health. How's the search for counselors coming along, and what seems to be the pipeline for integrating more mental health training professionals involved in crisis intervention?
Yeah, so I'll say a few things about this because obviously mental health is obviously part of my portfolio too with the county executive's office. So we continue our efforts to build out the crisis response team to really, I say the Department of Health and Human Services, they were up to 3 teams. I think I think they're cautious because I think there's really 4 teams that are operating depending on the time. Obviously, they're covering 2 locations at this point, both up county and down county. We need more social workers. We need more therapists. We've been using peer recovery specialists to try and cover. I will not go into too much because we're in active bargaining with McGeo around trying to do some additional things with regard to recruitment of therapists and social workers as well. We're bargaining with the union on this, and I think we'd like to get to a place where we can do some different things on that space. Also, I've been working with Tracy Anderson, who is our director of the Department of the Office of Human Resources, around trying to create this pipeline situation where we're actually talking about creating subsidies for the training and education of therapists, social workers, and other nurses, for example, difficult to recruit positions, so that we can both address, really try and have a long-term strategy and pipeline to build out beyond just offering additional incentives to hire people who have already been trained. Because I think the reality is in the social work therapist space is that not because it's expensive and the pay on the back end isn't necessarily requisite with the expense of doing it, you end up with real disparities in the diversity of the pool of applicants that come out at the back end. And so we're focused on trying to have a population of social workers, therapists, peer recovery specialists who look a lot more like our county than the pool that we typically get that applies in this space. And so obviously we're trying to address both of those.
And I don't know if Chief Jones or Chief Frank have anything to add to that that hasn't already been addressed.
So
with that question.
Right. So for us, first, we're working with HHS on following their lead. And reviewing for tonight's meeting and talking about what we've implemented. And I see Dornay's here and can talk more about that. But HHS is engaged with regarding cahoots and gotten guidance there that we're implementing. I had my list up here a second ago, but again, we're following their lead. But internally, we're also through our communications, we're also diverting calls over to HHS. We've come up with a framework for how to divert nonviolent mental health calls when resources are available over to their shop. We also evaluate whether or not it can be a civilian response where there's no danger posed to the therapist. So we continue to tweak those, and we continue to learn from what we're doing and adjust as we go along. It's a very difficult situation, both because of the hiring, needing to hire. I mean, anyone can turn on the news and see that there is a shortage of therapists across the country. So filling these important roles is going to take a minute, but we're constantly adjusting as we find more resources. Within the department regarding implementation, I was going to speak for a minute on what the implementation committees are doing and how we're approaching things. I guess I'll just say right here, there's three different major buckets that we've been implementing for the last 2 years. It's the work of this group here with Reimaging. There's also the Police Accountability Act in the state of Maryland. And now we have the ELE4A report, which we're 90 days out from. And we're from the final report. Although I will say that because of the work of Dr. Burns and them, we've had preliminary information that we were working on already, because the reality is we had three different efforts going on at once that all needed to be addressed. All of them were a little bit different. Some of them items were the same. And so as Dr. Burns was referencing, we had to step back and look at, could we meet the goals of all three groups across a similar item? So we've been grouping items. We've been looking at best practices and coming up with strategies to address the different things. I will say, for the longest time, the Police Accountability Act, which is state law, it's one of the most progressive, and Dr. Burns can confirm or deny, is probably the most aggressive state police reform laws from across the country that have been implemented or still being implemented here. And we are responsible for them, accountable because of the law. So we have been working feverishly on that, along with taking care of the other items that weren't dictated by law, but also wrapped around that. Anyway, back to the mental health before I go prattle on too long. We have one of your recommendations for Reimagining Public Safety is that all officers coming out of the academy receive mental health training. They now get a 40-hour block coming at the end of the academy, and that's in addition to future training they'll get in service and updates, and as any other best practices come out or we change policy. So that has been implemented. All officers had a mental health one-day emergency course that we put out. That's 2 years ago now, to really quickly close a gap in what we thought was some information that officers needed. We continue to run officers through our CIT school. Again, another leader in the country as far as providing strategies and knowledge to officers and dealing with people in mental crisis. So all those efforts continue. And regarding the update to you, again, I apologize. I wish it was up to date right now. I could show you all the great work so that you could see it in writing. I guess, I've told people before around here, don't believe anything till you see it in writing. So I get that. And we are working now to get that website updated, not only with implementation information, but we now have to add I've got a sheet in front of me where I counted it up. So ELE4A had over 200 recommendations, actually about 100, and there was some slight duplication, so we're down around about 186. And we'll be updating the third file on that forward-facing website with that information. I'll stop on that.
Okay, I'm looking at the chat. I'm trying to stick with a theme here so we can continue the conversation. So Scott, correct me if this is your question, but did you say in terms of the 40 hours, is it required of them or it's optional? And if I'm wrong, Scott, please put in the chat. I think that was your question.
It's required. We've extended
Okay.
the length of our academy.
Okay. And as a follow-up from Edmund, who asked the original question about mental health, any efforts to engage the existing training programs in the area like University of Shady Grove, Montgomery College to partner in building out a long-term supply of the people you need for these mental health responses?
Short answer is yes. I think Dornay wanted to chime in there because I could see her nodding. I know that.
Okay, okay, sorry.
Yes.
I look at the questions and I can't see
Yeah.
your faces. So please, if
okay.
my face don't look like I'm responding to you because I can't see you, come focus on the questions. So I apologize.
Hi, it's okay.
I'll
Hi,
let
Bernice, how
Dornay
are
start
you?
but then I'll also add in because I think I've had
Sure.
actually conversations with Dr. Damian and Dr. Williams about this as well.
Yes.
Okay.
So we
great.
currently, to reflect what Dr. Stoddard said, we're looking to increase um, our therapists to look like our community. We have several memorandums of understanding that are going out right now. We already have one with University of Maryland, Shady Grove, and University of Maryland, Baltimore. We are currently working on Howard, Morgan State, and Catholic University, as well as a few other smaller schools, because we know that that is the way to really get people in the door, is offering internships and having them in the workforce and seeing what we do, and then having them prepared to move in and be a permanent part. And that way we've trained them up in the best practices in the way that we do the work here in the county. Bernice, there's one other question in the chat I can answer, but I'll let
Please.
Dr. Stoddard finish. No,
Yeah,
Dr.
great,
Stoddard can
thank
go.
you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, and this is something we're looking to expand with Montgomery College as well. Actually, I'm in leadership Montgomery with Dr. Williams himself now, and we actually had a conversation pursuant to a leadership Montgomery event that we were at about 3 weeks ago about this very topic around trying to leverage the college as a pipeline right into working in the county. The internships is something we've already addressed. We've actually got an agreement. Normally you can't do an internship where you work. And we've actually gotten the universities to agree that for the county, they would allow us to do both of those things so that we can simultaneously get people working while they're building out their credentials, rather than have to have them do an internship in a different location besides where they work. So that those are changes that are ongoing.
Okay, great. So Ms. Hill, you said you can answer one of the questions in the chat?
If Dr. Stoddard would like me to, I can.
Go for it.
Okay. So the internships are not paid. The internships are ones that graduate master level, they have to take as part of their requirement. So it helps them towards getting their degree. Yes, we have hired peer support specialists for our mobile crisis outreach teams. We have 8 positions, and we currently have 4 on staff, and we have 2 or 3 more in the pipeline coming.
But I also talked, for those who don't know, we actually replaced not replaced it. We hired a new, we didn't replace, he left, our Office of Human Resources Director, Tracy Anderson, just came on and actually had a conversation about paid internships. I think I would express the sentiment that unpaid internships are bad and paid internships are much better. And the county agrees, and we're working on addressing paid internships, particularly in the spaces where we need to hire nurses, social workers, therapists, peer support specialists. So more to come on that.
And are you limiting hiring to social workers? Has that been answered?
Are we limited?
Are you limited to hiring social workers? Are there other people you can consider?
No, we've hired other spaces. I'm guessing this is referring to other categories of mental health providers.
Yes.
Yeah. So Dornay, if you want to try, the answer is no, we're not limited to hiring social workers, but Dornay,
correct. Sure. We hire, there's a couple different level of people that fill out the mobile crisis and outreach teams. We have to have an independently licensed clinician. That can be someone with a master's in social work, marriage and family therapist, a licensed clinical therapist. We also have the ability to have case managers and peers. There's the education requirement is very different for that. So we have a full array of opportunities right now to fill out our teams.
And one more aspect of the mental health piece, the mental health of our officers, if we can talk about the progress on that space, in that space.
The Police Accountability Act also recommended and actually made into law that officers will be have a psychological examination every 2 years biannually. Chief Jones, I see Sheriff Wee here, worked very hard to put a program in place where our officers will, in accordance with state law, have that biannual psychological examination, and have put that into place where we're at the beginning stages of testing. It takes a while to, or not testing, of doing the evaluations. And we have a plan for the first 2 years and are accomplishing it.
I think it might, yeah, there are a lot of questions, but I do think this is an area, because I know Dr. Burns, the report talked a lot about early warning systems and the need to build out an early warning system. And I know that's another thing that the department is working on. I think, because I think it goes into the psychological evaluations of officers, understanding early, you know, what the precursors for potential problems might be. Dr. Burns, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about the early warning system recommendations, and then maybe the Chief Jones or AC Frank, you want to talk about what's being done about the recommendations?
Sure. So I think that the one thing about the early warning, early intervention system is that's going to be a really important tool in general to have a more comprehensive track of the health of an officer's career overall, because a good early warning system is going to track not only things that might be red flags or aggregate up to a red flag, but also positive things like awards and commendations and things of that nature as well. And it can help to become a great promotional tool and supervision and accountability tool as well. At the time of our audit, what was in place really wouldn't represent what folks on our team would think of when they say a system. It was really more centered around kind of like if you had 3 complaints within a year as a basis. And that's not really a system. And also there was no kind of data and software tracking that information in any kind of regular way. And so that's why in the report, there is a little more detail about what the alerts could look like and what they might be. But the idea is that you would kind of track this information, and you could have what essentially is like an algorithm in the system that, like, if for example, someone's lost a gun, someone's gotten 2 complaints, someone's use of force has increased, they've been missing work, that you could program it where if those things happen in combo, it would create an alert to that person's supervisor, or if it was concerning enough, a higher level of supervision, and then you would then be able to do kind of an intervention to understand what's going on. And so it's just a really important tool because it also helps officers get the support that they need without them having to seek it out. And so at the time of our review, that didn't really exist for MCPD at all. That's an honest, like, it just wasn't functioning in that way. But now the state also is backing up that requirement. And so it's going to be important to not only create the policy, determine what the best alerts are and the thresholds are, training supervisors on how to use it as a tool, right? Because if the data is entered, but no one's analyzing it, it's still kind of useless. And so that's going to be really important. And then again, that's another policy that can be informed by the community and by officers about what you think is critical. Like, there's some best practices out there, but there could be other things that you may want to see put in there. Early warning systems also cover things like if someone's having a domestic issue, you know, if they are having personal things going on in their personal life that's ending up in the courts or the criminal system, arrest, all of that is tracked and kept in there in a confidential way. So that's just more of an overview of what the system looks like. It's not intended to be a disciplinary system. A well-functioning one is almost more of an HR tool than a disciplinary system. And the reason this is really important, when we were in the meeting with the accountability board the other day, I was telling them a story, even just here in New Orleans a couple of weeks ago. We had a situation where an officer committed suicide. And it was really concerning. And then when it was time to kind of start talking to people, they were like, oh, we were concerned about her. And the people had concerns about her. And then when you went into That's the whole point, right? It's like you want to be able to understand if people are struggling before they commit an excessive use of force or harm themselves or a family member or a loved one. And so a big part of our report, even though it wasn't really in the scope of the audit, we felt obligated to add that section about the officer assistance and wellness overall, because even in interviewing officers, we were told from some of the patrol officers and younger officers about some of the stressors and strains of doing this work, and the toll that it can take on one's, mental, emotional, psychological, and physical health over time, and also during heightened crisis-related type events at the same time.
Anybody else before I move on? Okay.
Bernice, I would just add something to what Dr. Burns just noted. Actually, a couple of things as it relates to early intervention. One of the other, I think, systems that are now in place, law where we have a random body-worn camera review of officers, and we're doing that. We implemented that program in December. And we have random selections of body-worn camera footage that we have 2 sergeants reviewing that's reported out to a captain on a pretty much a weekly basis that then is reported out to me. And then when there's anything that's identified that either is a performance issue or even an internal affairs issue, that those are brought to the attention of those who need to know and to have those issues addressed. I'd also note that, this department, we know we're not saying we're perfect when it comes to officer wellness, but one thing I would say, similarly what the Bernice is talking about, is that we've identified in certain situations where officers are having difficult times, sometimes in the job itself with mental health issues themselves. And then there are times we have a process that we can actually have what we call a fit for duty, where we can send the officer to the Office of our OMS section, which is occupational medical section, where then they will be put in the care of a doctor and to get the help that they need. And on top of that, we do have a full-time police psychologist team that is connected to our Office of Human Resources, that's really connected with our peer support unit, which is again a group of officers and professional staff that collectively are trained to provide support to officers in a variety of, and other professional staff in a variety of ways. So there is an extension of that process when we look at early warning systems, that sometimes when officers are having sometimes issues at home, it could be problems with drinking, it could be a variety of things that could be identified as noted, but that there are these things that we take very seriously, and we make sure that our supervisors are well trained in identifying many of these symptoms that our officers may be, or their performances that are occurring. So.
Great, thank you, Chief. And thank you all for answering the questions in the chat. So it saves me a little bit of time. But I do want to have an open conversation on the training supervisors, because that came up a couple of times in the chat. What changes are being made in the training supervisors? And forgive me, this is a portion that I specifically do not recall in the recommendations, but I'm sure it was addressed. So you can talk a little bit about what changes have been made since the audit report on training supervisors, the training of supervisors.
Assistant Chief Frank, would you want to speak first to in-service? Is it more general or specific to
Yeah, what's specific? I mean, so we continue to refine and expand our training. If it's referenced the question on mental health, we have over the last year and a half, I would say the biggest effort on trying to tamp down the stigmatism of officers needing help and also getting information to our officers so that not only supervisors but peers can recognize officers in mental distress. So we've expanded that training and wellness training in general. Supervisory training. We do a mandatory supervisor training for sergeants and also for executives every year, where we touch on first of all, we touch on what we train officers so that they're fully familiar, but then we train on supervisory issues like wellness, like bias, like ethics. So we continue to put forward a very good platform there. I'm looking forward to getting one of the recommendations of the ELE4A was to hire a civilian deputy director for our academy, a PhD, if you would, to help us with the cohesiveness of our training and the overall plan of our training. So that has been that is something that was approved in the budget and that we're in the process of hiring. And we think that will help us to jump way ahead of where we are with our training, not in the aspect of the quality of our training, but as noted before when we first started this discussion this evening, data. We're very good at developing training and creating training and coming up with plans for training, but for you academic folks that are out here, there's much more that goes into that. The record keeping, the preparation, the notes, the cohesive curriculum that builds upon each other. And that is one of the things that we had trouble demonstrating because we didn't have the staff to do it. Now, between the efforts of the county executive and ELE4A, we are going to be getting those assets, and we'll be able to do that. And I think it will also be quite informative. One of the issues we have in a police position is that people get promoted, people retire, people move on. We see the opportunity to have professional staff involved in our training as a huge opportunity to get consistency and a plan that builds upon itself through years, even a decade, if you would, rather than just over a couple years until we lose someone with all that institutional knowledge. So.
One thing I'll add to that in the more general sense is I think if Chief Murphy was on, he would say when thinking about the field training officers, the sergeants, the lieutenants, and the command ongoing training. So we tend to refer to that sometimes as like in service because it's not like your initial training or like police academy. It's the training that you're going to do every year. And that training can change from year to year, and it could be thematic and it could build on certain things. And so we saw kind of two important elements, one being that tying closer someone's training to their new role. So for example, if someone's getting promoted or put in a new position, making sure that they're getting the training that they need to be successful in that role closer to when they become that role. Sometimes with the sequence, it could end up where you get promoted into something, but your training may not come for 6 months because the training was scheduled for a certain time period, but your promotion came prior to when the training was available. But that's where having that kind of master training plan could help better align things like that. And then on the other side, we would say that there is a really great job specific training, but making sure we're weaving in those other skills, such as the human relations training and the community policing and procedural justice and fair and impartial policing and cultural competency and those themes as ongoing training opportunities and not being completely focused on job specific tasks, which is important. But we think that, it can't be a one and done where you're learning about bias-free policing or procedural justice. That's something that's going to need to be reinforced throughout your career, especially once you're 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 years in. And so I would say that those are kind of the two aspects of training is the tying it to the role, but more human relations training, and then making sure it's being delivered in kind of more scenario-based problem solving, critical thinking, and adult-based learning models along with it. So that's why we really think that kind of turning your police department into something that feels more collegiate or more, like a university style setting where there's ongoing professional development at all levels is going to be really important.
Let me give a little context for that question, if I can. most officers, most workers do, follow the lead of their supervisors. So it's really the supervisor that sets the tone for a department. And really it's incumbent upon us to make sure that the supervisors, are really on board in terms of this culture change that we're trying to achieve. So they really need to be trained or retrained on how to create an important culture where everybody feels comfortable speaking up and saying something if they see a problem, or say they see a person that's not behaving properly. They can't just keep it to themselves. They have to encourage that and reward that. And that's an important part of supervisor training. And I don't know how that's being done within MCPD.
Well, how I will address that is that first and foremost, one of the policies that I implemented a couple of years ago is very important in regards to understanding the duty to intervene. And this policy has been pushed down from the top down, that everyone is held accountable no matter what your rank. Supervisors are held accountable, and monitored by their executive officers to make sure that they are addressing any behavior issues within their own ranks. But those officers within the ranks are actually required by this policy in order to report out on any bad behavior by any officers that they observe. If they fail to do so, then they would also be held accountable as a result thereof. Again, we do a lot of ethics training and integrity training with our supervisors to make sure that they understand the degree of accountability that they are held to based upon the role that they play. And it is something that, I take very seriously. It is pushed down amongst the executives because that is, from my standpoint, a leadership role that we play, that leaders, supervisors have to be leaders and have to lead in an honest and integrable way. And if they don't do that, then they will be replaced as a result thereof. So again, we do a lot of we make sure that we focus on, again, sending our supervisors, and particularly those who are aspiring to additional leadership positions, to specialized training, to make sure that they are obtaining the training necessary in order to make sure, again, that they are adhering to the values of the department and how we set that forth.
Have any supervisors been removed from their post because of that, or how has this been implemented?
We've had supervisors who've been transferred as a result of their failure to supervise. Yes.
So I do want to follow up with the my own question. We haven't really talked in detail tonight, but I think it's important to discuss is the workforce. I think it was Chief Frank that mentioned, was it, you said 186 vacancies? Did I hear that right? In terms of the vacancies in the police department, or was that a different number?
Right now we have about 120.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Vacancies. Yes.
Okay.
But we are. I'm sorry.
The number reported to the council is 129, and that was last Monday.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, there's no question that there's vacancy problem in the department. So my gut reaction is, okay, well, how realistic can we think about how fast we're moving when you have this, the short supply of staff? So I looked at the recommendations for hiring in the audit report, and wanted to know if any of those recommendations have been considered in obtaining and getting new officers or new employees, excuse me.
I apologize. Which report are you talking about? ELE4A or which one?
The audit report with the recommendations under hiring and recommend. Let me pull it up myself. It is. Okay, I'm now looking at the dashboard. So I'm looking at the full report from the summer. It's 126 pages. I'm on page 113, recruitment and hiring recommendations.
Okay.
So just a general question, has those recommendations been considered when looking for new candidates for the force?
They absolutely have been. I have a different document in front of me. I'm trying to find the recommendations in the ELE4A
Sure, I can put
report.
I can put it in the chat. Let's see
Well,
here.
Bernice, I'll start with it because I'm looking at it now. One of the
Okay.
things
Thanks,
that
boss.
one of the things that we did that's been implemented, and we working with the county executive and the council, was we were able to increase the starting salary. So that is one of the main things that's been implemented that has really kind of put us in a more competitive a way in order to compete. Again, you know, I know we did a staffing presentation before the Public Safety Committee just earlier this week. One of the things, again, I wanted to note to, I noted to the council, to the Public Safety Committee, is the fact that police departments across the United States are having the same problem. We are not in this battle by ourselves. This is a, and I think there's a lot of other professions that are also struggling in the hiring realm. And though we are in a very competitive market here in the Washington D.C. area, so it does require that when we looked at again, we looked at many of the issues that that was recommended in this report. There are things that we did implement that we're doing in our personnel division to change some of the ways that we're doing. Chief Frank is leading many of that charge. But again, like currently, I will tell you that it does not necessarily mean that there's automatic wins here. But we are working on things such as bonuses for our department, for people coming on, because in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area and the state of Maryland, for example, there are departments that are offering up to $20,000 sign-in bonuses in order to hire new police officers. And you have to be able to compete in that realm. And so we're working very diligently with the county executive, who's been very supportive of us in order to be able to do these sorts of to have that sort of approach as we're moving towards really replacing these officers. Let me be clear. Currently, though we are 129 officers down, currently right now this department is moving very rapid. We're right now about 20% of our department is eligible to retire today. And to give that some context, if we go back to the mid 90s when President Clinton created the cops office and I would say in the cops office, he had a big hiring push on law enforcement all across the country. Montgomery County, we were in the stage of losing a lot of veteran officers in the early 90s, and therefore we began to hire at a very aggressive rate. We had classes of up to 80 officer candidates in classes as a result of replacing probably somewhere close to 400 officers who were given an early retirement. Well, to be clear, the payment has come due because those officers who were hired in the mid 90s are now those officers that are now eligible to retire today. And that's where we are. And so we have had to manage, again, as we see these officers, that not only are we dealing with those who are eligible for retirement, but we did deal with a large amount of resignations over the past 3 years, higher than we've ever had before. So we've had to address that. But again, we are aggressively trying to do what we can from a recruitment standpoint. But at the same time, we are also managing the police department in a different way in order to make sure that we are meeting what is the expectation from the community of police service on a daily basis. That is first and foremost the most important thing that we have to do to make sure that we have officers who are available to answer 911 calls and respond to those calls.
Regarding
Delegate, I just wanted to say,
Yeah.
is there like a managerial concern, and it could be to the chiefs, whoever, is there a managerial concern on being alert to the quality now of the hiring now of policing, since there's so many vacancies and you're trying to fill them. You have some, as Chief Jones just said, who are eligible for early retirement. Now you have this vast, I think it's 129 vacancies. Is that a managerial concern where you're watchful for the quality of officers that you put through these training in the academy? Or
I will note, Bishop, that first and foremost, what I have said from day one, ever since we began to start having these issues, we would never lower our standards to hiring just because we needed to fill seats. I have not done it. I will not do it as long as I'm the chief of police here. And so if I have to have, I've had classes as low as 11. And you know, that's, in my opinion, it's pathetic, but that's a reality. And because we could not find the quality number of candidates, you know, though we might have had 400 people apply, just because we had 400 people apply didn't mean that they were Montgomery County caliber candidates. So therefore, we have lowered, you know, we might have lower numbers in our academy. I'd rather do without than to put people in the seats that are not of the quality that we expect from Montgomery County Police. So we work, you know, again, we're working very aggressively to find those said candidates as such. And I think the salary increase, I think potentially the bonuses that we're going to give, I think we're going to be able to have a larger pool to select from and a better quality of pool. But it's going to take us some time. This is not going to be a problem that we're going to solve overnight. It's going to take some time for us, our department, to kind of get back on task to get the numbers back up to speed to where we want them to be.
I want to try on one thing here, and I think this is a really powerful example. We actually had a number of transfer applicants this last cycle and excluded all but a very few of them based on the investigation into those lateral transfer officers and the finding that they were, for lack of a way to describe it, fleeing past bad behavior with their existing department. And so despite our need for officers and the fact that lateral transfers get on the street faster than just about anyone else because they've already met the Maryland state requirements, the department is not accepting those transfers because, you know, filling spots only works if you're not going to be left with a disaster when those officers start and are routinely violating people's rights as a result.
And it's kind of like a two-pronged thing. On one hand, you're square in a national debate about the standards. So some departments are starting to open it up for, you know, you can have limited marijuana usage. You don't have to have any, you know, post-high school education. It's okay to have a misdemeanor if it's of this or this or that, you know, and so this is something that kind of has to be community dictated because it's a very hot topic. Like if you've been following some of the news in Memphis and et cetera, you know, there's a lot of questions about lowering standards and the implications of the lower standards today. And then it's leveraged though about, you know, interest in more local hiring and attracting a more, you know, a just and accessible, you know, way to become a law enforcement officer. So it's really, really complex, this notion about what the hiring standards and what the minimum qualifications and what are the automatic disqualifiers. So that's the heart of that conversation, is that a department can have automatic disqualifiers. And then there's also some areas where there's discretion, right? Where that background investigator has an opportunity to maybe talk to you or talk to someone or do the references and make a determination about if they think that you are deemed appropriate as a recruit candidate. So like, I think that's one part of the conversation. And in some jurisdictions, even when they're loosening the standards, they're still not filling up their academy class. So it's kind of very touchy. What some agencies are starting to do now, if you look at Baltimore as an example, is, you know, in reimagining public safety, we may end up in a world where there just will be fewer police officers and we'll have to do a more efficient job with the police officers we have who are sworn. And so having alternative police response, beefing up online reporting. Some jurisdictions are starting to deputize city workers for being able to, administer citations or municipal things, quality of life related issues, property theft. That's not, all these nonviolent issues that may come up that are more related to quality of life. You could basically stand up a whole civilian labor force and pay them a great job, and it's just that there's certain duties that they would not be able to do, but there's many police investigative duties that they could do. And so a lot of agencies are looking at that. So for example, I believe Baltimore is an example that comes to my mind, but it's almost like you're creating these two roles where you could become a police officer, or you could become like a police officer, where it's still a comparable pay, right? A little bit less, but you can basically have a police investigative specialist type role or a police intake specialist role. And some places are seeing that as a necessary alternative in the event that we may never, you may be a place that used to have 2,000 officers and you just will never have 2,000 again. And it's just not going to be tenable, but maybe you could have 200 civilians doing all these jobs that officers don't have to do or don't need to do. Do you need an officer to come out for a stolen bike? It depends on what the community thinks, but that could free up a lot of time if, stolen bikes, there was just a PR campaign that says, hey, go online and report your stolen bike here or call this number. So I think it's kind of a decision about, with civilianizing some of the duties that have been traditionally officer duties, if that would help. And then also it provides great job creation, for our young people who want to participate in this world, but maybe they don't want to be a police officer. But it also creates a pipeline, because there are people who could start out as these civilian investigators or intakes who do decide to become police officers after, getting engaged with the county or the department. So we don't talk about that in the audit report, but that's something that's increasingly in the national conversation that could be considered a viable solution.
And Dr. Burns, I would just note that we are doing some of what you are speaking of. We are looking at many positions within the department and looking at whether or not they can be civilianized. And in fact, we've transformed some of those positions already. We're also looking, we've also, I think Earl, Dr. Stoddard put it in the chat about our telephone reporting unit, where we have upstaffed that in order to take more reports on via the telephone. And we're looking at implementing an online reporting system as well in the very near future. So we're looking at some technologies that are also will change the way we respond and how we address and how we will police differently. And we'll keep the community abreast about those changes once we move forward with that direction, because I think it's we're gonna have to look at things differently and not expect to be similar to what we were doing in recent years.
Okay. I think we might have time for one more question. I did want to touch on the trust question that came up a couple times as something we have not talked about yet. I know we have our community engagement division, but thinking back to the audit report and the recommendations, there was discussion about, or recommendations about, the districts working with the community engagement division. So can you speak to, what's been happening since these recommendations regarding the districts engaging with the community more, building trust, particularly with our Black and Brown communities?
Of course. So, what we're having is we're having our each district has community service officers who work in the districts that are connecting with our community engagement division for outreach and working in some of our communities, particularly those communities that have been impacted by crime at the highest levels. For example, in the 4th district, I know we've done some outreach in the Latino community in some of the surrounding areas, and several outreach events that impact our communities. We've done some outreach with our autism community, trying to address some of the issues with parents who have children of autism and developmental disabilities. So we will continue to do some expansive issues surrounding that. Staffing is a problem as it relates to some of our community engagement. We're looking at figured out how to revamp that in a way that we can do. I mean, that's another idea of also utilizing civilians in some of our outreach programs in order to be able to really connect with our communities and have established. We did an outreach program this past summer in the White Oak community at the recreational center where we did pretty much, we called it night basketball, but that is one of our highest crime areas in the county. And while we had that program that occurred on every Friday night with young people, from probably the ages of about 9 to 18, we had a very successful outreach where the kids came out every Friday with their parents. The kids were very respectful. And then when we looked at crime issues that were going on within those areas at that very moment, it was literally there were very little events that were occurring during those time periods. So it showed that some of that outreach is working. So we're going to do some expansion on that. We were working, county executives giving us some support on that. So we're going to work on that as well with other funding and working in other communities to do the same.
So one thing I wanted to add, like as the time starts to come to a close, is I think that maybe this is just the first conversation. I think that there was always an intention that we would re-engage, right? Mark and Bernice, I don't think it was ever like oh, this is over. I think it was like, let's let the audit take place. Mark and Bernice asked us regularly, every couple of weeks, how's the audit going? How's the audit going? So I think they were always waiting, till the information was out there to then re-engage. So I think I saw somewhere in the chat, maybe we could have a couple of more of these conversations, more anchored around the themes and the recs and what's going on specifically. I think this was a great first conversation just to see people's thoughts and reactions to the report. We never even got it. And even in this meeting, we didn't really get a chance to hear your reactions about the audit report and, your thoughts about it, or any, additional ideas you may have or contributions you may want to make to the implementation efforts. So maybe we could kind of reconvene with Mark and Bernice and Dr. Stoddard and figure out if, we want to set up a couple of meetings, or if we want to have this idea about, I don't want to add a burden and say, y'all join the implementation call, but maybe some way where we could touch base or think about how to move this conversation along. I feel bad that it feels rushed. I guess that's what I'm trying to articulate. Like, I don't think that if we could talk all night, we could, but we're out of time. But I think that there's a lot of things in the chat that we didn't get to talk about and we didn't get to address. We can download the chat and I can get with Dr. Stoddard and we can try to make sure that those questions or comments at least get some type of feedback from the appropriate person to answer it, so that people's questions in the chat don't go unanswered. That's one thing I think we should do. But I also think we should consider meeting again. There's also a lot of folks missing tonight. It's a possibility that maybe this wasn't the best time. Maybe we could try an alternative meeting that's at another earlier in the day, or this has tended to be our time though. So with that said,
Dr. Burns,
yeah.
Dr. Burns, as chairman of the PAB and ACC, we would love to set up a meeting at the PAB anyway for ELA to come and do a meeting with us. So I'll make that offer publicly for the PAB.
Yeah, actually, no, I appreciate your saying that, and I think we'd very much welcome it. I think we have covered a nice amount of ground tonight, and I appreciate hearing about the steps that are being taken in implementation in various ways. So clearly there's much more discussed. We want to remain engaged and be as helpful as we can. But yes, we'd very much welcome an ongoing conversation about how things are moving along and what else needs to be done.
Yeah, Earl, one thought that comes to mind, maybe say if we end up doing the monthly update of the dashboard, maybe around the monthly update, we could do like a briefing close to it to talk about the update, like some type of 30 or 45 minute or, something like that. We can maybe come up with some way to keep this going, but not so frequently that it becomes ineffective, but frequently enough where you can feel informed and also informed in advance, not like always, oh, and this happened, but you didn't know about it. I think I got some sense that people would like to know what's happening before and as it's happening, and not just once it's finished. So.
Yeah, I think that's a totally reasonable idea. I mean, I mean, our dashboard. I agree. Our dashboard is bad. Like it just isn't effective at relaying what work has been done, and there is a lot more work that has been done that you all aren't seeing, which is what I sense that is a great portion of the frustration. And so obviously we'll commit to getting the dashboard updated, and what we'll do is I'll push to get that dashboard updated, and then we'll schedule a meeting right after it so you can see the updates, and then we'll schedule another meeting so you can respond to the updates, ask us questions about things that haven't been updated and how long they're going to take that way. Because I think you're going to see that there's been more work than I believe you think has been done, but we have to demonstrate that. As it was said earlier, it's not what you can, it's not what you can, it's what you can prove in court, basically, right? We need to be able to illustrate that we've actually made the changes that we're describing to you all.
Earl, Jim Starr, I got to put this in here. I know you guys trying to wrap it up. And Dr. Burns, thank you so much and to our co-chairs for your leadership as well. But I'm so glad, Doc, that you just made that comment, because I really want to go back to the point that Joanne made early in this conversation. And I think that's the point from which we kind of started all of this, from the sense that there was this disconnect between community and law enforcement. So I'm so glad that we have, again, opportunity for more frequent opportunities to share what has been done. And then just echo just one thing you said in terms of being able to show it in the kind of detail that's understandable and that people can actually see. They can actually see the change without it having to be explained, and or on the dashboard for that matter. I mean, you can see it. And so a lot of it has happened. And maybe the messaging also is not something else we got to work on to do better as well. But at the end of the day, that really is let me just say this. We've got one shot at this, in my opinion. I think that the timing, the window of opportunity suggesting that we've got this opportunity, because we don't do this well. The opportunity to come back at some point in time to do it again will be just that. We'll be doing it again. And I don't think the credibility will be even in place to even try it again. So that's why I think it's just so important. And with the work that has been done, that we can do a better job of sharing that work, because it has been significant, as I've heard tonight. But everybody's not on this call. And so therefore, no person won't be able to hear the great work that's been done. I have been in a community where a decree was in place, lived very close to Cincinnati, who went through for 3 or 4 years with the U.S. Department of Justice decree, and telling it is a horrible thing to go through in terms of getting some sort of sense of what really happens and how things improve. It does take time, but we got to be able to communicate with folks that what we're doing, how we're doing it, and the impact that they can see happening in their lives on a daily basis is absolutely critical. So again, I just want to share that and just echo what was already said. And Dr. Burns, thank you also for just that suggestion of how we might be able to at least begin to communicate more frequently with the general community, not just this group, but I'm talking about the general community to be able to also be engaged in these conversations to the extent appropriate as well. Thank you for allowing me to share that those brief comments.
So I think Dr. Starr, you wrapping up for us?
Yeah, so thank you all for attending. Obviously, it's a reflection on how much you all care about your community that, we had 30 people here for an hour and a half on a Thursday night. The work you all have been involved in this work for over 2 years. And in fact, you're here 2 years later, still asking for change is important. So I appreciate your commitment to the community, and look forward to having additional updates like this in the future. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for the participation and ongoing support.
Thank you too.
Thank you. Have a good night.
All right, thank you, folks. Have a good night.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.